Hello, everybody, and welcome back to an emergency podcast from the Emergency Broadcasting Jewish Corporation of Jared and Adam, who will be kvetching today. I'm Jared, and
I'm Adam.
that's Adam. And we've got some more Candace Owens on the docket for you today. Adam, are you not going to comment on my haircut?
I didn't notice you got a haircut.
Well, they didn't cut the front short enough, but otherwise, yeah, I mean, I got a haircut.
All right. Well, that's a good haircut then.
Okay, all
That's
right.
the
Well,
best kind of haircut is when you don't notice that when someone doesn't notice that you got one.
okay, I guess that's fair enough. No comment on the beard, which is coming back.
Um, well, no comment on that. No.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Well, it is summer. I'm still in my bathing suit, but this podcast had to get recorded, so we are here.
Right. But I want to comment though first on the comments that we received on the last podcast that we put up, the one with Jonathan Karp. There were like 8 or 9 comments on there. A few of them were nice and encouraging, but most of them were by people that obviously did not even watch the podcast or hear anything that was said in it. I mean, they were mostly people that were just saying things like, well, if you guys just stop committing genocide, then anti-Semitism won't be a problem anymore.
Hmm.
And then there was one that basically called Jews demons.
Let me ask you something. Were we committing genocide in the year 1880 or the year 1920 or the year 1940?
Apparently, the genocide goes all the way back to the late 19th century.
Now, I don't have a recollection of a single person before, let's say, 1920, of even accusing the Jews of anything. And given the small fragment of Jews who were living in Palestine at that point, they're
Yeah, well, but they didn't find out about it until more recently, and the more recent generations that are much more enlightened and understand the true dynamics of what actually transpired.
but it would stand to reason if they didn't know about it until recently, there wouldn't have been anti-Semitism back then.
Um,
They
are
can't hate
you
the Jews. They can't hate the Jews for if this is the reason they hate the Jews. They can't hate them for it if they don't know what's actually going on.
Well, you got me there. I really have no response.
Well, you're a political scientist and I'm a historian, so
You're using you're using logic again.
yeah, I know, I know, I know.
Yeah. All right.
So much for logic. So there's been a lot of comments. Please check them out. Comment if you've watched our show. Give us a thumbs up. We like it. Today it's gonna be a short episode because we've already done Candace Owens, and this is just an
Another reason we want you to give us a thumbs up is because it helps promote our channel, right? The
we
more
need
thumbs up,
promotion. We need promotion.
yeah.
We're going to have a pledge drive, and we're going to get second-rate comedians and third-rate moils to come
Yes,
perform.
that's right. And we're going to
Yes.
be giving out some great prizes in this pledge drive. We're going to be giving out oven mitts. We're going to, oh no, we can't give out oven mitts
It's a
anymore.
Holocaust reference, apparently. Yeah, we can
You
do
can't
that.
do that.
Yeah.
Sorry. We're going to give out what? Frisbees
I don't have
and
a frisbee to give away, but if you want to get one, I have
how
tote
about
bags from conferences that I attended. Um,
tote bags from conferences? I don't think that anybody's really interested in getting an AJS tote
well,
bag.
that's what they give out at the PBS pledge drives, right? Don't they?
Oh, that's true. And
Yeah,
what about license plate frames? We ought to get JSCN license plate frames.
that could be done. That could be done.
Uh-huh. My other car is an anti-Zionist, something like that.
I like it. I like it.
Uh-huh.
But we're
Yeah.
going to get a good live. I remember there was a Happy Days episode once. I think it was one where Fonzie jumped over the motorcycles, and Ralph Malph had been writing
No,
it
that was
in a TV show.
Shark he jumped over. He
No, no.
jumped
First,
over
he
the
jumped over
shark.
motorcycles, and that's why he
Oh,
literally jumped the shark because they did the same thing again because their ratings were down. So he was on some TV show called like You Wanted to See. If that's actually the name, I'm impressed with myself. You Wanted to See It or something like that. And Fonzie jumps over the motorcycles, but Ralph Malph had been writing into that show every week, asking that they show a human sacrifice on the air. And so we will do something similar, perhaps, for our podcast if we have a pledge drive. We need entertainment, but it'll be with a Jewish tinge. So maybe we'll have a circumcision on the air. I'll have to check
live
my building
circumcision.
code.
Yeah,
I'll check my
okay.
building code to see if we're allowed to have circumcisions in the building. Um, who
Do you
knows?
know any loyals?
I could find a moil. Can't be that hard. I could find someone who wants to pretend to. I've always wanted to pretend to be a moil.
That's true. Yeah, it's true. You always want to do that. Yeah.
All right.
Is
So
anybody here a Moyle?
do I what?
Is anybody here a Moyle?
We need a moil. I don't know why it's pronounced moil if it's mohel in Hebrew. It's never made any sense to me.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
In
know.
any
Okay,
case,
let's get started talking
okay.
about today's topic. Just to show you that we don't just complain about left-wing anti-Semites on this show. We sometimes complain about right-wing anti-Semites, such as
Yes.
that we're going to talk about today.
And that's a fundamentally important thing here because we need to understand, and I am not taking a personal political position here, though I do define myself as a liberal, but Adam is a conservative. He's on the right side of the spectrum. But there is an anti-Semitism problem on both sides of the political spectrum in this
That's
country.
right.
I This is something that we could get into at another time to discuss, and it would explain why a large number of Jews, as Jews, vote for Trump, because I don't think all, quote, white nationalists are anti-Semitic. And that goes a long way to showing how Jews, since day one in this country, have more or less been treated as white people. In fact, I found a very interesting article while I was doing some research for this podcast today from 2006. Okay, so when anti-Semitism was still really below the surface, and there was a big schism at some conference that that whatever the white nationalists called themselves back then were having. David Duke was presenting, and then part of the room walked out because he started attacking the Jews. And he said, "This is not about the Jews. This is about other minorities." Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying these other white nationalists are good people or anything. I'm not saying there's good people on that side. I'm merely suggesting that the Jews have, for the most part, for the larger chunk of what constitutes white nationalism or white supremacy in this country, have not been the primary targets. And that's what made this country different than Europe in so many respects. But there is that neo-Nazi fringe in white supremacy in this country, and it's always been there. And very much so, the Jews' place is tenuous as conditional whiteness. And you step out of line, and then all bets are off. Right, they very much have their litmus tests, but it's a very different situation from Europe, and that's why we've been more or less safe here. All right.
I, I would say, though, that I don't think that when it comes to the right wing, white nationalists, anti Semites, at least not in the United States, we don't really need to worry about them making our lives difficult or miserable, other than obviously killing us in these massacres, right? These mass
Yeah.
shootings. Violently, they are able to do a lot of damage to us, but I'm not really worried about them, running administrations of universities or serving, making law in our, in any
Well,
great numbers anyway.
the issue with that, and here's the parallel with Nazi Germany, and I'm not saying this makes Trump Hitler by any means whatsoever, but if a certain politician on the right taps into the fact that they're going to be able to get neo-Nazi support, right? And there's no question that the neo-Nazis, for whatever reason, were under the impression that Trump was their guy in 2017, right? That's why David Duke said at Charlottesville, "We're in power now." Now, I'm not suggesting that Trump aligns with their views in any way whatsoever, and I do not think that he does. But at the
Yeah.
same time,
He gets their votes.
he
All
gets
right.
their votes, and he could be a conduit for the wrong people. And that the wrong people as far as the Jews go. I'm talking exclusively about Jews here. And
Yeah,
that,
but you could argue though that some left-wing radicals supported Obama.
yeah, that's true. Though I don't think Obama's rhetoric really descended to the same depths that Trump's does. Now, I'm not necessarily justifying any or many of Obama's things, but that's a separate conversation here. But
I disagree, but
but okay, I've been following the far left, even in Obama's administration, and they had a lot of issues with him throughout, right? They came to think of him as a centrist, very relatively early on in his career. Obama's foreign policy was junk, but when the left was like condemning everyone for celebrating Osama bin Laden's execution,
yeah, that may be
just
true, but I would venture to say that the far right thinks the same about Trump.
they came to believe that about him. Absolutely. No, they came to realize that, and we know that with the Charlottesville shooter. They came to realize that he was not the Charlottesville shooter, sorry, the Tree of Life shooter. Excuse me. He came to realize that Trump was not their guy, right? He was proving to be a big letdown in that respect. Absolutely. I fundamentally, agree with you there. Trump doesn't have his marbles together, and he's constantly doing machinations, and I think that's different than Obama in that sense. But Obama, I just remember when Obama went on TV after the execution of Osama bin Laden, and this was clearly directed at the left, and he said, given 9/11 and given everything that's happened, anyone who does not think taking out Osama bin Laden was a good thing really needs to have their head examined. And it was just, one of those moments where I said, I can respect this guy. Um,
All
because
right.
it's a thing. Okay, but we're not going to get into this now. All right, so Candace Owens, as we know, is an influencer on the right. I have no idea how a moron like this has risen up to this position. I didn't put her on the radar as an anti-Semite. She made some bizarre comments about Hitler, which were just so off the mark that I didn't even think, of her as an anti-Semite. I just thought of her as a delusional.
We've already done an episode on Candace Owens, and
Yeah,
it was well viewed. A lot of people, we
yeah.
got a lot of hits, a lot of viewers on that one. In that episode, we explained why she's an anti-Semite. We explored that to the full depths of the topic. So if you're interested in finding out why we think Candace Owens is an anti-Semite, watch that one. But today we're going to look specifically at a tweet that she just put out yesterday.
I'm going to backtrack for 1 second just so nobody thinks I made a Hitler-Trump analogy here, because the fundamental difference there was Hitler wasn't just trying to cultivate support from the extremists so he could get more votes. That was his position, full stop, right? He wanted the votes from the German workers and everyone else, but in his mind, it was the who were not fringes because they controlled the universities, and that's what he wanted. The Jews were central to his agenda. So there's no parallel there between him and Trump. It's all about the electorate overlooking other stuff. So let's leave it there. We're going to turn on screen share. I will never go on record as being a comparative person between Hitler and Trump, which is just nuts. I'm going to turn on screen share. And just as a very quick refresher, Adam, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. This was the last tweet that sparked our previous episode, and we're not going to rehash it. Please watch the episode. But clearly, in this, President Zelensky sure is behaving like a Bolshevist. How many more Christians will he conscript to death? Zelensky is the president of Ukraine, and he's of Jewish descent. Whether he's proud to be a Jew or not, is anyone's guess. He certainly plays it up when it's useful. But the point is that she's labeling the Jew as a Bolshevik, and she's labeling the people getting conscripted into the Ukrainian army as if they didn't want to defend their homeland, regardless of who is in power, from the invading Russians, as being, innocent Christians here. Okay, so it's utterly absurd, right? If anything, I mean, this is Ukrainian nationalism at work here, whether you want to argue that's good or bad. So that's what sparked our previous podcast. We won't rehash it any further. But just when you thought she couldn't take it up a notch, she went ahead and did. And this is the tweet that's been making its rounds this week. And I will give a little bit of background after I read it, because a lot of people don't know who Leo Frank is. The ADL was literally created to cover for a wealthy pedophile murderer named Leo Frank, who raped and killed a 13-year-old girl, then tried to blame it on a poor, Black, illiterate janitor who worked for him. This was in 1913 in the racist, segregated South. The evidence was so overwhelming that they convicted him, wealthy Leo Frank, despite his attempts to plant evidence on other people. The ADL now refers to Leo Frank as a victim of anti-Semitism, as if they're the only ones. They are sick, perverted defenders of pedophilia and murder. Every single person should study the Leo Frank case, even though she obviously didn't. Ask yourself why the ADL has so much pull in government. Okay, there's about 12 anti-Semitic tropes in this thing. Just on the ADL specifically, we don't have to go into much about it. It was founded as a result of the Leo Frank case, an anti-Semitic incident, a major anti-Semitic incident in the United States, and it has been the chief organization for much of the 20th century and into the 21st century, defending Jews and, in as much as possible, human rights in general in the United States. Its mission has become complicated now because it's also a Zionist organization, and the left is now anti-Zionist, and that wasn't an issue 50, 60 years ago, but it is a problem now. So the ADL has been getting it from both the left and the right. They're being attacked all around. And for the left, they're complicit in white supremacy. For the right, we have the anti-Semitic tropes at work here, and that they're globalists and whatever else. So, okay, so who is this Leo Frank?
I bet you anything her next tweet is going to call Alfred Dreyfus guilty.
That is if she's even heard of the guy. Leo Frank, and here I'll show off, see if I actually do have any talent as a historian. I'll give you guys a 4-minute or a 5-minute version of what happened, which I had to reread this morning, admittedly on Wikipedia. Leo Frank was a Jew who was born in Texas, was educated in New York, and eventually ended up.
There were Jews born in Texas?
Yeah, a colleague of mine, God, I'm drawing a blank on his name, wrote a book called Chosen Folks, and it's the history of Jews in Texas. Oh, if you're looking for gunslingers for the work project you're working on, you might as well check that out. Yeah. It's
I've
called
seen
Chosen
the.
Folks.
I haven't
I'm
read
drawing
it.
a blank. He's a really nice guy. I'm drawing a blank. He teaches at a community college in Texas. Really good book. Very useful for my research on Jewish humor in the South. So Leo Frank, okay, was a Jew, came from I don't know if his family was wealthy, but they're of the German Jewish generation, near as I can tell, though it didn't say much about his family origins here. And he made it up. You know, he was a degree in mechanical engineering, and he ended up becoming a director of a pencil factory, in a major pencil factory in Atlanta. This is in the years leading up to World War One. The incident that transpired took place between 1913 and 1915, so right when World War One was happening. Okay, so here is a Jewish factory director working in the segregated South, working when people, you know, there were virtually no labor laws here. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was around this time. I think it was in April 1912, the biggest industrial accident in American history that led to all these labor laws eventually. So Mary Fagan, the person who was murdered, you know, was working like a child who was working like 65 hours a week or 50 hours a week or whatever it was. So the larger context here, and this goes a bit back to what I was saying before, is the state of anti-Semitism in the world and in America during this period. So I would argue that from approximately the late 1870s, 1880s, until the Holocaust was the peak of modern anti-Semitism in what we would call Western civilization. So basically Europe and the United States. I'm leaving Palestine out of it for now. So there were three high-profile incidents that occurred simultaneously, near simultaneously. Alfred Dreyfus in France, who was put on trial for conspiring with the German government. He was a high-ranking military official and in the French government, and he was a testament to the success of emancipation in France, that a Jew could make it up all that high. Hundreds of thousands of Frenchmen were in the streets chanting death to the Jews because it played into the disloyalty tropes. It was
You
collaborative.
do know that Julia Louise Dreyfus is distantly related to him.
Really? What about
Yeah.
what's his name? Richard Dreyfuss.
As is Richard Dreyfus,
Yeah.
yes.
I wonder why they're all named 3 feet.
In fact, I think Richard Dreyfus is directly descended from him.
I did look into what's why their last name means 3 foot, and I'm trying to. I looked into why that's the case, but there has to be a reason for it. In any case, none of them had 3 feet, to my knowledge. We would have maybe that's why Elaine danced funny on Seinfeld. She had 3 feet. So it's a good theory. So I could have worked that into my book, damn it. So, anyways, there were three high-profile incidents. Dreyfus in France spent 10 years on Devil's Island before he was acquitted
It's
eventually.
not Dreyfus, it's Dreyfus.
Dreyfus. We could argue about that. Maybe in Canada it's Dreyfus. Well, in German it would be drei, but in Yiddish it would be drei. So I don't know. In Russia, Mendel Baylis was put on trial, or is it Beilis? Are you going to argue that it's Beilis, not Baylis?
Beilis.
Mendel Baylis was put on trial for blood libel in 1912-ish, so right around the same time. And he was actually acquitted, but after spending 2 years in a czarist prison. And in the United States, you had Leo Frank. Now, Alfred Lindemann, a historian, wrote a book comparing these three incidents. And what's interesting here is the one that had the most deadly outcome for the Jew was the one that took place in the United States, and the one that had the most favorable outcome. Not that Mendel Baylis, you know, spending 2 years in a czarist prison is a walk in the park, but he actually got fully exonerated. So it's a little bit ironic there that the most anti-Semitic country had the most favorable outcome. So even in the United States, there was anti-Semitism during this period, but as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the Jews had sort of been grandfathered into whiteness. This, though, was the peak period of anti-Semitism in the US, primarily because of all the Russian Jews who were coming over between 1880 and 1920. They were not quite white, unlike the German Jews who more or less fit in very fluidly into the environment. Nobody really challenged them. There was minimal anti-Semitism during the Civil War era. And the South was relatively comfy for the Jews during this period. And then you have this incident happen. But the Russian Jews living in the Lower East Side, like the Ukrainians and the Poles, you know, maybe they could be white one day, but we're not there yet. You had virulent anti-Semites in this era, like Henry Ford. Charles Lindbergh, you know, was arguably an anti-Semite just from that one notorious speech he gave. And Father Coughlin is going to come onto the scene a little bit later, anti-Semite in Chicago. So it was, and then he's a Catholic, obviously. So it's coming from all sides. I think he's a Catholic, right? So if he's father, so it's coming from all sides of the white Christian spectrum. So Candace Owens, who is an African American woman who is on the right, you know, came out with this tweet about Leo Frank. So Leo Frank was a director at the pencil factory. And then Mary Fagan, who was a 13-year-old girl who worked there, not uncommon, of course, in that era, was murdered and allegedly raped. I say allegedly because I don't know if that really figured into the charge and trial. Evidence pointed to her being raped along with the murder. There was virtually no evidence against Frank except the testimony of a barely literate African-American janitor who was arrested at one point, but ended up testifying against Frank at the trial. And that was pretty much the only evidence they had to convict him. The timing was all wrong. It looked like this guy Conley, the African-American, was the one who was actually guilty. But for whatever reason, they convicted Frank, which is a testament to the extent of anti-Semitism lurking below the surface, even when you think everything is okay. So Mary Fagan did leave a couple of notes. I didn't know this until today. And one of them, she was barely literate. And one of them referred to a night watchman or night witch, which is what the African-American was. So there was sufficient evidence to point to the other guy. In any case, Frank was convicted. He was sentenced to death. The sentence was commuted by the governor. It went all the way to the Supreme Court and the appeal was denied. But then the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Commuted is the right word, right? Commuted?
Yeah.
Okay. Commuted to life imprisonment because they didn't think the evidence was sufficient to warrant a death penalty. They were a little skeptical about the outcome of the trial. The town was so angry. There was a mass mob. They broke into the prison. They took Frank out and then they lynched him. From what I read once, and I don't know if this is 100% true, I'm sure there might have been other incidents, but he's allegedly the only Jew who was ever lynched in American history, which is a very uncommon way to terrorize Jews, right? So we know its legacy or its relationship with African-American terror against them throughout American history. Okay, so history moves on. Frank, people study this case immensely afterwards. He was basically cleared, and at some point, there was a judicial ruling a number of years ago, maybe a few decades, basically exonerating him. They didn't end up changing the verdict of the trial, so it was never decided whether he was guilty or innocent, but they cleared his name and they said no.
But it's commonly believed that he was innocent.
Yeah, the consensus is that this guy is innocent. And that's the thing. There just was never a retrial involving, or then there couldn't be at this point, involving the janitor. So, I mean, there's nobody except for people on the fringes of the right who walk around thinking Leo Frank was guilty at this point. Now, the Anti-Defamation League was formed on the heels of this to combat anti-Semitism in America, because this was, a Jew getting lynched in the United States was just so unheard of. And, it's remarkable also in the South, the racist, segregated South, that the testimony of an African-American witness would be enough to convict a Jewish person. I mean, what does that suggest? That this presumably all-white jury was going to listen to this African-American and basically use his testimony to convict Frank. So there must have been a strong current of anti-Semitism down here. Lots of people have written about this. I am by no means an authority. It gets mentioned in my classes briefly, but I don't go into great detail about it. So just to get back.
Let me ask you a question. Other than just answering because she's anti-Semitic or that she's stupid, although each of those could be the correct answer.
We'll go through some of the things in this tweet. This isn't just stupidity. It goes far beyond.
I want to know, on what basis is she saying that Leo Frank was guilty of this crime?
Nothing. The fact that he was convicted and there was never a second trial, or he was never, fully.
Is there anybody that's reputable, any credible sources that believe that he was guilty?
No, unless you think the alt-right is credible. Modern researchers generally agree that Frank was wrongly convicted. That's okay. Wikipedia, and I'm sorry I have to rely on Wikipedia for this, but that's it. I could do deeper research, but we wanted to get this up right away. I am a professional researcher, as is Adam, who has already written 2 paragraphs of his new book. So
2 paragraphs.
You wrote 3 paragraphs?
4.
Okay, all right, 4. That's 2 in the last 2 hours. That's great. So, the thing is here, okay, the only people who believe this are conspiracy theorists on the right, and one of our friends in JSEN sent me a long list of a Twitter thread of all these conspiracy theorists from the alt-right, and I didn't feel like doing any digging into that, and most of the names didn't sound familiar, who are basically agreeing with her. I'm going to show a second tweet from her in a second, but there are a lot of anti-Semitic tropes in this tweet. Can you pick any out? What do you see, Adam?
Oh, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're all over the place. But I particularly want to discuss. We'll get to it at the end, but I want to talk about her accusation that the ADL has some sort of disproportionate influence in the American government.
Well, that's one of the stereotypes, right? So, but here, wealthy pedophile murderer. Jews have been accused of being sexual criminals throughout history, right down to the Middle Ages, kidnapping young Christian Jews. That is a trope that Hitler made use of. It's in Mein Kampf. The black-haired Jew boy waits in the alley to defile a young Christian maiden. So that's a stereotype, of course, that overlaps with African American stereotypes, at least the rape portion of it. I don't know about the pedophile portion of it. But and a lot of historians have written about this, how horrible it is. Jewish humor has, played this up about the Jew wanting to deflower the young Christian maiden. It's a theme that Curb Your Enthusiasm has a lot of fun with. But it is very much a stereotype. David Duke has written about it. One of our colleagues, so I won't name at the moment, who writes about Jews and sex, actually used this colleague of ours in his podcast to actually out the Jews as being sexual predators. So, and Harvey Weinstein, right? I mean, that was like confirmation, basically, for people who believe those stereotypes. And
You see that stereotype, in lots of serious literature. Saul Bellow.
you think? I'm not that. I've only read a couple of his books, so I don't know which one you
Oh,
referring to.
like Herzog.
Herzog. I haven't read Herzog. Is it worth reading? I don't know if I've only read Mr. Sandler's Planet, which I didn't think was a great book, and I read one other. I read the story Him with His Foot in His Mouth, which I didn't like very much, but it had a couple of really funny lines in the middle of it. Okay, so we got the pedophilia and we got the murder. We got the victim of anti-Semitism. The Jews misusing anti-Semitism to exonerate themselves of the crimes they commit, and then of course the biggie here at the end. The ADL has so much pull in the American government, right?
And
So
by the way, I also think that it's very irresponsible to do this to foment African American hatred against Jews. I mean, she's
well,
basically saying that that we have a poor black illiterate janitor uh, who was accused of this by
yeah,
the
Candace
Jewish.
Owens is and the fact that she's an African American woman makes her very useful to the right because they could say, see, we're not racist. Look what we got over here. And they know also the left is going to be reluctant to criticize an African American woman. Every time I criticized Ilhan Omar without bringing up race or gender, I was accused of targeting unfairly an African American woman, which is nuts. I said, well, I'm going to say the
I
same
don't
thing.
think the left has any problem. They have no qualms attacking Candace Owens.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll look for some of the usual suspects on Twitter. I hope so. I hope they're able to look past that. Well,
They
anyways,
will.
they're all using to use the race card when it's
That's
convenient.
actually one reason I'm really surprised that Candace Owens is doing this, is that I mean, she had so much of the left hates her. I mean, the left really hates African American women that are on the right. They don't like that, right? They don't like. Um, I mean, the far left anyway. They don't like that they're not espousing a liberal progressive framework. I'm not necessarily saying they personally hate them, but they don't like the fact that the existence of conservative African Americans gives credence to the political rights set of ideas. But the fact that she's now alienating so much of the political right with this nonsense is not good for her either. I don't know
Aside from
why.
aside from the neo-Nazi fringes, of course, and we got to leave them out.
Yeah, but the neo-Nazi fringe probably don't like her because she's black,
Right.
right?
Oh,
So
I mean,
who's left as like who is she trying to keep as her supporters? Like she's just completely cutting down her base of support.
well, the what I would call the
Her
Fox News right.
audience is being
Yeah.
chipped away.
The Fox News right better than I do. I mean, what would someone like Tucker Carlson say in response to something like this? Because I managed to avoid these people at all costs.
You know, as much as my respect for Tucker Carlson is greatly diminished, I'm not so
You
sure.
well, hold on. You had respect for him at one point?
I did. Yes, I did.
All right.
And
And
still
you're saying
once in
this
a
on
while.
film? Okay.
But I have a hard time seeing him endorsing this tweet or agreeing with it. I don't know. But
Yeah, but at the same time, the ADL is something that's being attacked pretty much across the board on the right, and even like mainstream right people
I
like
don't like
yourself.
the ADL either. I've never liked the ADL.
Right, but you don't believe
But nobody likes the ADL.
they're
Other,
disliked because they target
other
both.
than the only people that like the ADL are centrists.
Yeah, and I guess I'm one of those. I don't have a particularly high opinion of Greenblatt at this point, but yeah,
I didn't like Abraham Foxman either.
they have, again, I will say they have a very tough job if they're trying to be both universal human rights activists and Zionists at the same time, because their original mission, those two things could, work together, defend everything about the Jews and any other minorities in this country. But now that doesn't work because the
They
left
want to
is
have
anti-Semitic.
their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, yeah, they do. Yeah, no, maybe they've outlived their usefulness. No, but they have, I don't know. I don't think they control the American government by any means whatsoever. I don't think they have
They
that much
don't control
influence.
the American government. I think also the fact that Obama's administration defied the interests of the ADL on numerous occasions is a testament to the fact that the ADL's influence has greatly declined. More importantly, though, let's say that the ADL does have influence, and they do to some degree. I certainly think that the bill that was passed by Congress last week or 2 weeks ago by now that uh, codified the IHRA definition, working definition of anti-Semitism, was probably largely motivated by lobbying from the ADL and similar organizations. But at the same time, the ADL is hardly the only uh, organization that has pull with the American government. There
Yeah,
are
I suspect APAC has more power. I suspect
APAC,
APAC has more power. Okay, you agree?
APAC, well, their power is also diminished.
Yeah,
But CARE also does, the Council on Arab Islamic uh, what is it called? The
I think it's
CA
I think it's relations. Yeah,
relations, yeah. No, it's the Council on American Islamic
right,
relations.
right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they have a lot of pull. I mean, lots of different organizations. The NAACP has a lot of pull.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if she were
For a
not,
while, Black Lives Matter had a lot of pull.
and Jews played a leading role in the founding of the NAACP.
That's
She's obviously not going to go there since she is an African American, I would assume. But then again, who the hell knows, right? But they did play a leading role in its founding. So, along with African Americans, of course. So this second tweet, I just want to read just because of one of her little her faux pas in it. So obviously someone's, okay, it was 1986, the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles finally granted Leo Frank a posthumous pardon. Okay, so he got a pardon, which I guess is not the same thing as charges dismissed or exonerated. Okay, because they found him innocent of the crimes he was accused of. Instead, because his lynching deprived, not because, yeah, so it was not because he was innocent, but because his lynching deprived Frank of his right to further appeal. Okay, now listen to what she writes here. You racist, lying, pedophile apologist. Yeah, I'm not sure who this person is below. He was never found innocent. He murdered and raped that girl. The ADL used all its political power to get him pardoned posthumously over 50 years after the fact. How dare you blame a black man in 1913? Here she's pulling the card that the left likes to pull,
but this person is not blaming a black man.
who they would have gladly hung.
What is this coming from? This in 1986 thing? Where's that? What is that?
The Georgia State Board of
Yeah. What is this?
this,
This is from what? From Atlantic History Center.
yeah,
So basically, she's responding to that.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
I don't know if I don't know where this tweet came from. The person she's quoting here, someone might have tweeted just that article, and
all
for
right.
whatever reason she chose to respond to that. We will tweet our podcast to her. I'll tweet it and you tweet.
What evidence does she have that he was guilty?
Well, she's right about the technicality here that he was just pardoned. He wasn't actually deemed
Yeah.
innocent. So technically speaking, he was still guilty, but he wasn't actually guilty. He was wrongfully convicted. But the point is, okay, first of all, here the big anti-Semitic trope here is ADL used all its political power to get him pardoned, which is obviously nuts. That wouldn't happen. And second of all, first of all, it would have gladly hanged, not hung. So she doesn't know her grammar. You used the word hanged for people. More importantly, they got him pardoned posthumously. What does that mean?
After death.
No, no, Adam,
Oh, it's not. It's supposed to be posthumously, posthumously,
posthumously. Yeah. Okay.
posthumously. Yeah,
Posthumorously. Okay. All right, Candace, you've proved your educational.
posthumorously.
Yeah, posthumorously. Okay. Posthumorously. It was so funny that we're now in the era of
Yeah.
Leo Frank humor. All right, I'm going to turn off screen share.
But
Show off my new haircut again.
I think that this is phony outrage. Do you really believe that she's sincerely angry?
No, she's looking for something for attention. I don't even think she cared about you. Well, I mean, maybe Ukraine. Is she very pro-Russia and the whole Ukraine thing? I haven't really followed her, what she's been doing with that.
I don't think she's all that genuine there either.
Because a lot of people on the right are, if not outright sympathetic to Russia, they at least don't want the U.S. aiding Ukraine. So at least with that one, I could kind of see how it fits a popular view, political view on the right. She could score points with that. And, a lot of people on the right are not smart enough at this point to just get the whole the Bolshevist thing about it. Because, yeah, she didn't say communist. She used the word Bolshevik. Obviously, the Soviet Union has been over for 35 years. So almost 35 years. So who knows? But this one clearly, I mean, why is she bringing this up now? How often does Leo Frank really come up? Our friend said, who follows the alt-right very closely, said it's one of their conspiracy theories that they use quite frequently. But I really don't see it surface that often. There was a TV movie about it. I was still living with my parents, so it probably would have been in the mid to early 90s.
Yeah, I remember that movie.
Oh,
Yeah.
you remember it? Okay. Yeah, I
The
think.
Murder of Mary Fagan.
Yeah. So it was one of those Sunday night movies.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
missed
it had
those.
a number, it had a number of big stars in it too, if I
Yeah,
remember right.
I missed those Sunday night movies. Good old days. So yeah, okay. So this is
It
what we
was
got.
not, it wasn't the wonderful world of Disney though. It was
No,
something.
it was your ABC Sunday night movies was the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was ABC. They were the after school specials. But on Sunday nights at 9 p.m., you were guaranteed movies on multiple networks. That's what made for TV movies. That's what they did on Sunday nights. There were no primetime television shows on Sunday nights for a very, very long period of time. This was like a staple piece of the 80s, probably into the early 90s. So I don't remember if it was all the networks, but then I think Fox broke the mold when they came out with The Simpsons, which I believe aired on Sunday night, and that was kind of the game changer at that point.
Mhm.
Well, that's a little bit of field, but in any case, what now? What's going to happen with her? What do we? I mean, obviously we can't do anything about her. How much influence does this person actually have?
Well, we'll find out posthumorously.
Yeah, we will indeed find it out posthumously. So we're gonna posthumously post this hopefully by this evening, and we welcome everyone's feedback on it. And let's be clear here. We are not just focused on anti-Semitism on the left. When it rears its head on the right, we are there to unmask it. Our issue with the left, of course, is the institutional power that they have in academia and the fact that they are so laser focused on the Jews. We are number one on their hit list. And I don't think that's the case with the right, aside from the fringe of the neo-Nazis. And with Candace Owens, she's all over the place. I don't know, but she seems to have an obsession with Hitler and Jews in recent times. So, but again, I don't follow her, closely enough to say. So that's our show for today. And just remember the larger context. This is my history lesson of the Leo Frank case. Only Jew ever lynched in American history, simultaneous with two other major affairs: Alfred Dreyfus, and Mendel Baylis Beilis. Those two my students always get mixed up on the exams in my class. I try to trick them with it, and they get it mixed up. So yeah, it was not a good time for the Jews in multiple places, but in the United States, they thought they were safe. If a Jew could
In
rise up,
fact, Richard Dreyfuss actually played Alfred Dreyfus in a movie.
oh, did he?
Yeah, he made a movie about the Dreyfus affair. Yeah,
Yeah, I still think it's Dreyfus.
Dreyfus.
I call her Julia Louis
So
Dreyfus.
there's another movie, The Life of Emile Zola, with Paul Muni. Has
Hmm.
he defended Alfred Dreyfus in court?
Jacques.
Mhm.
Jacques, which my daughter said for years because I believe it was a line that one of the characters on How I Met Your Mother constantly said. So,
Oh,
so when she said it,
yeah.
I looked at her. I said, "How the hell do you know that? I mean, like, where are you getting that from?" So
Mhm.
I'm sure she hasn't read about the Dreyfus affair. Dreyfus,
Dreyfus.
excuse me.
Yeah.
Emile Zola, but the movie. I mean, haven't really read much Emile Zola aside from Jacques, but I'm assuming the movie didn't focus only on that.
Oh yeah, a lot more than just the Dreyfus affair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there was. I mean, he was such a prominent person. That's
In
why.
fact, it was just one scene in the movie about the Dreyfus affair.
Right, right. Yeah, well, that's a fascinating topic in and of itself. The Dreyfus affair. There's much to say about it.
Have you ever heard of the word an anti-Dreyfusard?
Well, in France at the time, there were the Dreyfusards and I guess their opponents would have been the anti-Dreyfusards. But yeah, there was a whole French discourse that used those terms at the time. Um,
Well, I believe doesn't it have to does isn't a Dreyfusard someone that um, is both in favor of the Jews and democracy?
are you talking about in the context of the 1890s?
Yeah,
I would think so.
yeah.
I mean, again, the people, the protocols were also written around this time. The anti-Semites here had a problem with modernity. That was the unifying thread. And modernity for them was the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. And their argument was that modernity unleashed the forces that empowered the weak. Nietzsche basically said the same thing, but he didn't single out the Jews by any means whatsoever. I mean, he was just an opponent of the whole Judeo-Christian tradition. But modernity empowered the weak, and the Jews were able to manipulate, they were responsible for, not just manipulating it, but then manipulated liberalism, democracy, communism, international capitalism, all the ideologies that were not ethno-nationally grounded, in support of a fatherland that would be able to allow the Jews to control things from behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So, and this is one of the stereotypes about the Soviet Union. The Jews, brainwashed the communists, the Russian masses, who were, ripe for the brainwashing because they were just dumb Slavs and were able to control them that way. But they were the ones operating communism from behind the scenes, even when they were no longer in power in the case of the Stalin era. Obviously, there was a lot more presence before. Yeah, the Jews were disproportionately involved in the Soviet Union. We know this already. Stalin had to fire pretty much the entire diplomatic corps before he
Mhm.
signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact because they were virtually all Jews, including the foreign minister, Maxim Litvinov. So, yeah,
Okay, all right. So why don't we conclude here?
well, I like giving my history lessons. All right,
Yeah,
we'll stop over here. This was a good episode, fairly succinct. I like reading
yeah.
the USA. You like reading the USA Today, as Jerry Seinfeld said in the Yada Yada episode, when
Mhm.
George was dating the Yada Yada woman who was a shoplifter, and
Mhm.
yada yada sex. So let's. Oh no, she didn't yada yada sex. She might have.
She
George.
mentioned the bisque.
She did mention the bisque. That was
We're
Elaine.
back to fish. We're back
Elaine
to
mentioned the bisque.
yeah.
All right, so that's it for today, and you should buy my Seinfeld book because you'll get more of these references if you do.
Mhm.
All right, thank you everyone, and good afternoon.